episode of Caucasus Talks. Caucasus Talks is a platform that gives voice to researchers, practitioners, and activists to conduct alternative and informed discussions about issues related to the South Caucasus and also the surrounding regions. Today's guest is Dr. Shalala Mammadova. She is a historian by background. She graduated from Moscow State University, specializing in political processes, political systems, and regimes of the 20th century. She has taught and done research for over 25 years in various universities, both in Azerbaijan and around the world, for instance, in the University of Texas and many other places. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Mammadova, and welcome.
Good to see you, Leo, and thank you for having me for these talks.
And am I right in saying you are in Baku right now?
Yeah, I'm in Baku right now, and you are from London.
Yes, greetings from London to Azerbaijan. So I'd like to start with my first question. So you work in the field of historiography, basically the study of writing history, the study of how history is written and produced, and the different perspectives that come to create the written history as we see it in our books, in our textbooks, in our school books, etc. So in one sense, it's also a very political and politically sensitive profession, since writing history can be used politically to legitimize or to criticize the current state of affairs in a country or within a specific socio-political context. For example, here in the UK, one sensitive topic in historiography is the British Empire. So at school, we didn't learn very much about the British Empire, and it has significant consequences in the society here. I want to ask you, what sensitive topics exist within Azerbaijan in terms of historiography and the study and the presentation of history?
Well, thank you for the question. In the Soviet Union, national republics had a very short, brief national historiography. So, of course, I am speaking about the history curricula for the creating for the secondary schools and the textbook for higher education institutions. And it was in many ways understandable because it was a huge country with the multinational population, and each nation has its own history, own historical memory, traditions, and they're living under the communist ideology, which actually promoted creation of the Soviet nation. It should be one history, one historical memory, one sharing values. That's why there was very little space for the national historiography. And as a result, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, national scholars started to recreate or rewrite the national historiography because they did think that the very important parts or the points or issues of the national historiography misinterpreted by the Soviet historiography. So today we have lots of, as you defined, sensitive spots in Azerbaijan historiography. But it's possible to classify all these points through three main issues. They are historical geography or the geographical borders, national identity, and the state longevity. These three issues, as you understand, closely connected with the territorial claims and national ethnic clash and the regional disputes, are most important issues for the national, modern national historiography.
Thank you for your answer, Dr. Mammadova. So we touched upon Soviet influence, and perhaps we can even go back to the influence of the Russian Empire and Russian and Soviet research and its own historiography on the South Caucasus, and in this case, Azerbaijan and Politica in particular. How did this Russian and or Soviet historiography influence the national consciousness of Azerbaijan?
Well, if analyzed through that 3 points I have already mentioned, the geographical borders and national identity issues, and if compare Soviet historiography with the modern Azerbaijani national historiography, we find very interesting and at the same time complicated picture. Soviet historiography actually defined geographical borders for the national historiography, and these borders actually mostly coincide with the border of the national republics. For example, what they created by the Soviet historiography for the Azerbaijan nation covered borders of the Soviet Azerbaijan. But today, modern national Azerbaijani historiography try to widen these borders, and we find in new geographical terms, new descriptions, new interpretations, which actually the territories, the interpretation of the territories actually not belong to this to the territory or to the Republic of Azerbaijan. So in the Soviet period, in the Soviet state, we have the term South Azerbaijan, but we right now have, for example, Western Azerbaijan, referring to the territory of modern Republic of Armenia. Our textbook, our historical curricula covered, let's say, Derbent Khanate, which is a part of the Russian Federation, or Tiflis Emirate, which is a part of the modern Republic of Georgia. So the national, if compared with the Soviet historiography, national historiography, Azerbaijani historiography widened geographical borders. The second issue, national identity, is also problematic because the Soviet historiography accepted multinational population of the Azerbaijan, multinational structure for population, and in many ways accepted existence Iranian, Caucasian, and the Turkic-speaking tribes in the territory of the modern Azerbaijan. But national historiography narrowed national structure, and we right now have just one nation, Turkic-speaking nation, Turkic-speaking population. What about the third question, third point? I mean, the state longevity. Both Soviet and the Azerbaijan historiography accepted existence different or various polities or political entities in the territory of the modern Azerbaijan, but modern national historiography tried to glorify history of Azerbaijan, and right now we have nearly 5,000 years statehood traditions. So actually these three questions try to cover who we are, where we came from, and when we started to create our civilization, and glorifying our history. Our statehood traditions went back to nearly 500 years ago.
And I just want to pick on the second point where you mentioned the diverse makeup of Azerbaijan internally. So speaking within the context of Azerbaijan, as you mentioned, the dominant force in the national identity is made up of the, let's say, Turkic element, which is also represented, I think, the blue color in the flag is the symbol for that. But as we know, there are diverse peoples living within the borders of Azerbaijan, and even diverse peoples who contributed to the creation of the republic, not just people who claim to have, let's say, Turkic ancestry, could be different people. Now I want to ask, what is that contribution of quote unquote non-Turkic people to the tradition of historiography in Azerbaijan? And do they themselves have their own written historiographies, maybe locally?
Oh, it is not easy to answer the question because in one side we have very good research done by ethnographers, sociologists on the different ethnic groups, minorities of Azerbaijan. I mean, the Iranian-speaking groups, Caucasian-speaking groups of societies. But unfortunately, outcomes of this research do not include in the modern Azerbaijan history curricula. So we couldn't find their face and space in our historical textbook. But the research actually done by the Azerbaijani scholars we have. And what about the written historiography of the ethnic minorities? Of course, we don't have any written historiographies because it's a policy, not just as, let's say, Azerbaijan political establishment, it's policy of all the world's countries, that the countries should have one history. And this history is mostly the history of the titular ethnos. And the titular ethnos, as our political establishment accepted, is Turkic-speaking population. So that's why our official historiography, our history curricula, our textbooks, current history, our written historiography, all the one nation. So even we have the researchers, but the research also, the outcomes of the research don't attract the history curricula officially.
I agree with you there, Dr. Mammadova, in terms of the context or paradigm of the nation state. You will have your titular nation, which is, you can say, running the show in terms of politics and how we imagine the history of that nation, of that land. So we spoke about you mentioned that research is being done within Azerbaijan. There are ethnographers, there are historiographers. How can we compare it to research on Azerbaijan done in other countries? They can be in Russia, or research done on Azerbaijan in quote-unquote Western countries. You've been a professor in America as well. Is there research being done there or anywhere that you know of?
Well, there is very few research done by the, let's say, foreign scholars. I mean, the Russian, Western, or American scholars directly targeting history of Azerbaijan. But there are lots of terms, there are lots of topics, issues. What Azerbaijani historiography does think that it's a part of their own history. So let's say, for instance, Safavid Empire, which actually is a very popular term for the Western scholars. And I know that the early 21st century, there are lots of research done by, for example, Andrew Newman, Rudy, and Carlson on the Safavid empires. They are very interesting research on the Qajar dynasty period, very interesting research on the Russian invasion of the Caucasus. All this research has the correctly scientific questions, using proper methodology, using proper primary sources, but the answer and the outcomes of the research unfortunately don't coincide with the expectation of the Azerbaijan society, because what actually Azerbaijan society wants to hear, want to see, is far from history as a science. It's a, let's say, it's a just pseudoscience or pseudo research, not cover main ideas and not answer the questions what we can obtain from the primary sources. And right now we're actually, I can divide all research done in Azerbaijan into two groups. The first one, small group, where the historian tried to keep all values and track all scientific research procedures. And the second large part, which people and scholars, if we can call it them scholars or researchers, ignore everything, primary sources, methodology, posing nothing, and just declaring certain statements. So that's why there are lots of gaps, problems, conflicting situation when we, Azerbaijan society, try to read or try to get some information from the foreign scholars' research.
If we stick to the, let's say, the more serious academics who follow the methodology, they use primary sources. And let's say we take the examples of, you mentioned the Safavid Empire dynasty or the Qajar dynasty, which in most countries, or let's say research done, for example, in the West, see them as Iranian entities. But within Azerbaijan, within Azerbaijani society, obviously Azerbaijani ancestors had a significant role in these empires. To what extent their national identities are similar to now is debatable. But if we focus on those serious researchers, how do they tackle, let's say, for example, the Safavid Empire or the Qajar dynasty? How do they do research on it?
So if you mean how the, so I just would like to clarify the question. You mean that how the Azerbaijan scholars explain the history or introduce history of Safavid Empire? Yes? Is it correct?
Yes. Do they take into account all the diversity of it, that there were, let's say, Turkic-speaking leaders, there was a certain culture which was a mix of, you can call it Perso-Turkic, Islamic culture, with more diverse elements. Do they take into account this diversity, or are they also quite single-minded?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately not, because again, it is not a right time to be historian in Azerbaijan. So that's why if you try to explain what actually happened and using proper, reliable historical sources, I mean the primary source, it will be not right for the society, because society is not ready to accept any idea which promote the role of the others than Turkic societies or the Turkic tribes or the Turkic origin groups in the history of Azerbaijan. So these trends started to spread early 21st century, late 20, early 21st century, and came with the national movement in Azerbaijan. And unfortunately, it is deepened in nowadays, and it is difficult to understand the society, what Safavid Empire was in real situation, because again, the society is ready to accept pseudoscience, pseudo research outcomes, not the real science.
Thank you for your answer, Dr. Mammadova. Recently, we have seen some cooperation in the field of journalism between, in the South Caucasus, specifically between the Armenian and Azerbaijani journalists who recently created a documentary called Parts of a Circle about the recent history of the Karabakh conflict, taking different sides into account. And it's received a lot of reaction, both positive and negative. I want to ask whether you believe that in the near or distant future, or if you can imagine how historians can have a similar role and come together. It can be Armenians and Azerbaijanis, and we can incorporate Georgians as well in the South Caucasus region and perhaps beyond. Can you envision a situation where historians come together and write history together, sharing their knowledge and their languages to use primary sources together and build a picture of the South Caucasus, which is genuinely diverse, rather than focusing only on our own imagined nations?
Well, unfortunately, I don't speak and not read neither, and that's why it's quite difficult for me to say what right now happened in the Armenian and Georgian historiography. But I can assume that we are on the same boat, we're having problems, and we have the same trends. I think that right now it is not possible to talk about the joint research doing by the neighboring countries, 3 neighboring countries, because each country has its own interest, again, its own historical memory, and again, I think that it's not of course, the approach of scientists, of approach of the history. It's just problem of which has the political origin. And let's say if, for example, archaeologists of the 3 neighboring countries can collaborate and can do a joint research, getting together, working in the same archaeological site, historians might be able also get together, sitting at the same around the same table, reading the same primary source, and try to interpret the region history. But now it is, of course, unfortunately, not possible.
We can only dream for the moment, Dr. Mammadova. Hopefully,
sure.
In the future, and hopefully our younger generations can reach that point.
Maybe.
Finally, I just want to ask about your personal experience as a historiographer in Azerbaijan, perhaps holding views or methods which are not part of the mainstream in academia in your country. What can you say about your personal experience there? Do you your frustrations and contradictions? Could you say something a bit about that?
Who taught more than 25 years at the different universities of Azerbaijan, I could say that unfortunately there is no academic freedom in any university of Azerbaijan. That's a problem, because if you even share your academic knowledge, liable based on the primary sources, and if this knowledge not coincide with the official ideology and what the public political establishment want, the people or the society or the auditorium, universities auditorium here, it's not acceptable even for university students. And the same is true for the research institutions. So as a researcher, you also should keep several trends and several positions, track the common trends, common ideology. And if you do not, or if you fail to do it, it is again not acceptable. That's also a big problem. It's not, as I said, a right time to be historian in Azerbaijan, not as a teacher, not as a researcher. It's quite difficult to work in this situation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mammadova. It's been a very interesting talk, our first talk from Azerbaijan. We hope to have many similar talks connecting the region and introducing you and your work to other people in the field and beyond. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Mammadova. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, and good luck in your career.